2842 The winner takes it all. Nefis inhaled deeply and then turned away from the ruins of the spire she had destroyed. Her lips curved into a bittersweet smile. It might not look like it from the outside, considering how glorious and exalted the image of Changing Star, the last daughter of the immortal flame, is. But what led me here was not a string of triumphant victories. Rather, to me, it seems like the story of my life is a story of being defeated over and over again, losing everything over and over again, not knowing how to give up. So, if I do have one virtue, that virtue is perseverance, not valor. She sighed and gazed upon the desolate expanse of the forgotten shore with a distant look in her eyes. When I came here, I was so young, so naive, I did not know anything and did not have anything, except for my anger. I was so full of anger that it felt like it was scathing me from the inside, and I naively believed that my anger would take me as far as I wanted to go. But, of course, there were a lot of lessons I had to learn. Nefis looked down. It was smooth sailing at the start, but once I reached the Dark City, the cracks began to show. People I trusted the most lost confidence in me and left me. I managed to defeat Gunlog, just like I had planned to, but everything after that was a mess. I never expected that seizing power after his death would be so difficult. Every person who died in the senseless civil war that followed was one less warrior to lay siege to the Crimson Spire, and every death felt like a personal failure of mine. She smiled bitterly. There were more than 1,000 sleepers in the Dark City when I arrived. And that number was reduced by more than half before we even reached the Crimson Spire. In the end, only 100 made it out alive, and while I was still alive, I did not make it out. Needless to say, I would hesitate to call that a victory. Sunny listened to her silently. He could not explain that he had been there, too, that he had been by her side, surviving the same events, and learning the same lessons. That she had stayed behind so that he could escape. So, he couldn't do anything but stay quiet. It was fascinating, though, to hear about the events of that distant past from her perspective. Nefis had seemed like an icon of stalwart, uncompromising certainty to him back then. It was odd to know that she had been nothing more than an angry, naive kid who doubted herself and was hurt by her failures, just like the rest of them. It was just that she had hidden her vulnerable side well. No, actually, it was that she had been given no choice but to hide her vulnerable side. She was their leader, after all, so she could not show weakness in front of people who saw her as their only hope, because if she did, their last hope would be shattered. Sunny had experienced the same burden much later, in Antarctica. He sighed. You were just a teenager, thrown into an impossible situation by the nightmare spell. You did your best, and your best was damn good. No one else would have been able to do better. Sunny certainly would not have. His plan back then had been to hide and live the rest of his life in the Dark City, slowly going insane while forgetting what the word hope even meant. He had been young and naive, too. Nefis smiled slightly. Well, it wasn't all bad, to be honest. Even if I failed to escape, I learned a valuable lesson here, on the Forgotten Shore. I learned that the end did not justify the means, and that I only wanted to succeed in a manner that felt worthy. It is a good thing that I learned that precious lesson so early, all those years ago. If I didn't, somewhere along the way, I would have probably become nothing more than just another king of swords, just another queen of worms, or just another dreamspawn. I would have become the very thing that I hate. She sighed and looked east. After the Crimson Spire was destroyed, I was still full of single-minded confidence. That confidence was only broken in my second nightmare, where I suffered an utter, crushing defeat. And with my confidence, I was broken, as well. It broke me. Nefis shook her head. Later, I had to bow my head to the tyrants I hated, smile at the man whom I wanted to kill, bide my time while the great clans were allowing the chain of nightmares to consume Antarctica, and close my eyes to the crimes they committed against humanity. I was overly cautious and hesitant. I was a coward, and I only managed to regain my resolve in the depths of the third nightmare. In twilight, she chuckled and looked at Sunny. However, even that was only possible because of someone else. After all, in the original cycle of the Great River, I died. I was killed by my own companions. That was where my story was supposed to end, I guess, but it did not. And I don't even know why. Nefis looked at him, lingered for a few moments, and then said, "You'd know better than I do." Sunny was startled by her words. Before he could come up with an answer, though, she already looked away. After the tomb of Ariel came the greatest of my perceived triumphs. Attaining supremacy, slaying the sovereigns, and usurping their throne, becoming the ruler of humanity. But if I were truly as valiant and intrepid as people think, there would have never been a war in Godgrave. I would have defeated the sovereigns long before they could cause all that death and all that devastation. You know it well, our victory there was the result of a desperate gamble. It was luck. Sunny studied her for a while, then shook his head. You were right, it was luck. However, luck is not something that happens to you. It's something that you make happen. Luck only offers its hand to those who can grasp it. So, don't sell yourself short. Nefis chuckled. Perhaps. She lingered for a while, then looked at the Black Barrow one last time. I am supreme now, the shining goddess of humanity. Yet still, the Dreamspawn crushed me effortlessly as soon as he arrived. I couldn't do anything to thwart him, so I was defeated once again. Look around us. In the end, all I could do was abandon my people and run away. Sunny raised an eyebrow and asked in a teasing tone. So, what, are you going to give up? Nefis faced him and smiled. Naturally not. As I said, perseverance is my only virtue. It doesn't matter how many defeats I suffer, because I am always the one left standing in the end. I always rise back up, no matter how many times I'm pushed to the ground. Because I am still naive, and young, and I still don't know how to give up. Being good at failure is also a skill, you know. Turning away from the barrow, she headed back to the chain breaker. So, let's make sure to win this time. When this is over, the Dreamspawn will be the one sprawled in the mud, while we will be the ones standing above him. Because, she glanced at Sunny and winked. You and me, who dares to stop us? 2843 Where it all began. Sunny wanted to host Nefis in his castle, but sadly, they had to steer clear of the Dark City. The thralls of Astarion were still imprisoned in the settlement below its walls, and on top of that, he did not entirely trust the members of the Shadow Clan either. Astarion had already shown his ability to subjugate people with Oud stealing them from the domain of the Supreme they were loyal to, after all. Saint Thane, the dream merchant, must have regretted being born as a result. Nefis had been consumed by wrath after Red Hill fell, so. When their investigation pointed at the eccentric saint and his treachery was revealed, she simply turned him into a screaming bonfire. He did not scream for long, though, because the immolating white flames stole his voice. Nefis burned the enthralled saint until there was nothing left of him but a shriveled, blackened stick figure. But she did not kill him. Instead, she used the same flames to restore him to flawless health, and then burned him again, and again, and again, until the name Astarion became synonymous with harrowing pain in his mind. In the end, the agony and the horror proved terrifying enough to overpower the Astarion's hex, erasing it. And yet, Sunny did not think that the enthralled saint had been happy to have his mind cleansed and his free will restored. He was not sure, though, because by the time they left, the dream merchant had not regained his ability to form coherent sentences yet. Needless to say, Nef's method of healing people of the plague was even less scalable than Cassie's. So, Sunny could not take her to the Dark City. The chain break G traveled east for some time, and when they drew close enough to the city for the light emanating from the flying ship to be seen from the walls, Nefis released her channeling and let the world drown in darkness once more. Sunny replaced her at the oars. It had been a long while since he last steered the chain breaker, but his task was not difficult, they simply had to keep heading east. Sunny and Nefis left the Dark City behind and crossed the colossal crater that they had traversed more than a decade ago on a boat made from the bones of the Carapace demon. Beyond it lay the Ashen Barrow and the charred remains of the soul-devouring tree. All that was left of the fearsome terror was an enormous blackened stump, its jagged mass emanating an eerie sense of dread and malevolence. The chain breaker continued on its way east. Soon enough, they flew above the headless statue of the knight. That was where Sunny had begun his journey once. The small clearing in the labyrinth of crimson coral nearby was where he met Nefis and Cassie. Of course, there was no clearing anymore. The coral labyrinth was gone, after all, having turned to ash when the crimson spire fell. Nefis did not remember their meeting, either. Still, she must have retraced her footsteps and visited these places while traveling to the Nightmare Desert. She had remembered him back then. Sunny wondered what Nefis thought about while walking through the darkness alone. Nefis seemed to be remembering those times, as well. The hardest part was not the loneliness, not the cold, not the hunger, and not the nightmare creatures either. It was water. I was dying from thirst, the second time I traveled through these parts. Leaning on the railing, Nefis smiled. Luckily, even though the cycle of day and night was gone by then, the weather still remained. There was a storm once I reached the night, and I was able to both quench my thirst and store some water. Sunny remained silent for a while, thinking idly about his own wanderings across the forgotten shore. Eventually, he said, "You know, I took Slayer to the statue of the Slayer once." She was not impressed. Neffys laughed quietly. That was where Cassie's rapier came from. The sword grave around that statue, it was a truly lethal affair. We barely made it out alive. Sunny sighed. You know, every time I see these statues, I think to myself, now that I rule the Forgotten Shore, nothing is stopping me from bringing their heads back and attaching them to their necks. So, I always wonder, should I? Neffys turned her head at the sound of his voice. Why haven't you? Sunny considered his answer for a few brief moments. I'm not entirely sure. The Crimson Terror, the Nameless Sun, took off their heads because she hated them, and wanted them to be forgotten. She was entitled to her hatred, considering what they had done to her, don't you think? So, I don't really want them to be remembered, either. Plus, restoring the statues would feel like erasing history. And I am a big enthusiast of history. Eventually, they saw a line of pale lilac far away, on the very edge of the horizon. That was where the Forgotten Shore ended, and the Nightmare Desert began. Soon enough, they escaped the eternal darkness and dove into blinding sunlight. The cool winds were suddenly satiated by a blazing heat, and Sunny had to cover his eyes with a hand, hissing quietly. The switch between darkness and light was so abrupt that it seemed like someone had pressed a button, changing the world to a different channel. Sunny had not visited the Nightmare Desert since before his third nightmare. Now that he saw the endless expanse of flawlessly white dunes stretching into the distance once again, and the unreachable black triangle of the tomb of Ariel looming on the horizon, too, he perceived it differently. The first time around, all he could think about was how to survive in this mysterious hell. Looking at the Nightmare Desert now, though, Sunny was thinking about something else despite the imminent battle against the armies of the cursed undead that inhabited it. He was thinking about the demon of dread and the unholy titan whom Ariel had destroyed. This land had not always been a desert. It had been an ocean once, and that ocean was erased from existence by the ferocious battle between a demon and the Stone Titan. The corpse of the Stone Titan became the walls of the tomb of Ariel, and his blood became the great river. The 7 shards of his soul became the suns that illuminated it, and if Sunny was not mistaken in his suspicion, the space within the colossal pyramid had been fashioned from the Titan's soul sea. And a tiny shard of that primordial horror became Goliath, the fallen titan who ravaged the Antarctic center thousands of years later. That was the scale of battles between deities. Entire worlds were destroyed, while some were born instead. The mortal realm where the Stone Titan fell had become a lifeless desert, and even thousands of years later, it was still dead. Before, this knowledge was purely theoretical as far as Sunny was concerned. But now, it wasn't anymore, not at all. One step on the path of ascension, that was all that separated Sunny from battling creatures like the Stone Titan himself. Would he be able to do what Ariel had done? And how many worlds would be destroyed in the process? The chain breaker began to descend and soon landed on the very edge of the white sands. At that moment, Neffys suddenly turned her head and looked south, at the distant black wall of the Hollow Mountains. Or perhaps beyond them. Sensing a subtle shift in her presence, Sunny frowned. What is it? Neffys hesitated, then lowered her head and closed her eyes for a moment. There is An-Eles Citadel in my soul sea, and all its people vanished from my domain. Astarion must have taken another saint. Neither of them said anything for a while after that. Instead, they simply faced the Nightmare Desert, looking at the distant silhouette of Ariel's tomb. The vast expanse of the white desert shone under the radiant sun. 2,844 sands of time. The longing domain did not have a lot of time left, and yet, oddly enough, Sunny and Neffys had nothing to do at the moment. They had reached the Nightmare Desert in the early morning, with the radiant sun slowly climbing the vibrant azure expanse of the sky. The tomb of Ariel loomed on the horizon, but it was impossible to reach it. No matter how long one walked across the white sands, it never drew closer. They had never attempted to traverse the Nightmare Desert at night, though, when the two cursed armies turned it into a deadly battlefield. Sunny and Neffys both believed that the tomb of Ariel could only be reached at night, so for now, all they could do was wait. This was probably the last day of peace they would know for a while. The Nightmare Desert was vast, and even if their theory proved to be correct, it was going to take a lot of time to reach its heart, days, weeks more likely. Especially so because they would be fighting their way through a vast horde of undying beings who had been cursed by Shadow God to an eternity of endless war. Shadow God had been quite a merciless one, it seemed. After all, he had not only cursed the army that fought under the banner of the rebellious demons, his curse befell the warriors of the divine host, as well, making no distinction between friend or foe. But what else would Sunny expect from the god of death? He and Nephis remained aboard the chain breaker, watching the desert silently. Growing tired of the heat, they retreated into the captain's cabin of the flying ship. Sunny remembered how the two of them had slept here during their journey to Fallen Grace. Nephis, of course, did not. There was probably something useful they could do until the night fell, like meditating to clear their minds or going over the battle plan a few more times. But neither of them wanted to waste their last day of peace on rote tedium. After all, there was a real chance that they would not return from this expedition alive, or at least that both of them would. They were painfully aware of each other's presence, which filled the cabin with a heated pressure. Neff's presence ignited Sunny's longing, and her aspect allowed her to sense the flame of his desire. A light touch turned into a kiss, and a kiss turned into something more. In the end, they used the remaining time until nightfall to indulge themselves, engaged in passion and engrossed in each other with fervor and intensity that were as deliberate as they were frenetic, putting the sturdiness of the chain breaker to the test. Eventually, overcome by a sweet exhaustion, they cuddled on the sweaty sheets to rest and recover. Sunny was reminded of what Effie had said to him once, that when one was facing death, they wanted to feel alive more than ever. He was looking at the ceiling of the cabin, his thoughts moving slowly. His mind drifted to the last time he and Nephis had spent time together in this cabin, and then to the future. Soon, they would invade the Nightmare Desert. If they survived that, they would enter the tomb of Ariel. If they were to survive that, as well, they would face the vile thieving bird in battle. And if they survived that, too, Sunny would most likely regain his fate. That meant regaining his true name, surrendering to the shadow bond once again, becoming a carrier of the nightmare spell for the second time, restoring his ability to challenge the fifth nightmare. And, most importantly, it meant that Sunny would be remembered. That was something he had wanted for the longest time, and at times with desperate intensity. He had spent years unsure and not knowing what to do, only recently deciding that he did not want to be forgotten anymore. That he wanted to be remembered by the people he held dear once again. But now that the prospect of being remembered ceased to be a merely theoretical possibility and seemed to be within his grasp, Sunny suddenly found himself afraid. Yes, people would regain their memories of him. Nephis would know what they had endured on the Forgotten Shore together and why she stayed behind in the collapsing Crimson Spire. She would remember how they slept in this very cabin as the great river carried the chain breaker downstream, into the past. She would know that this was not the first time the two of them had come to the Nightmare Desert together. However, she would also remember how Sunny had abandoned her and verged to face the first seeker alone. How he had run away to fulfill his own selfish, misguided desire. She would remember his betrayal. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. How would Nephis react if she remembered him? Would she be happy? Would she be angry? Would she slap him across the face, perhaps, full of scathing accusations? Or would she kiss and embrace him instead? Most of all, would their fragile relationship survive that revelation? This closeness between them had not come easily. Sunny had worked tirelessly to build it, even if the foundation on which he was building it was missing. He often felt unsatisfied and saddened by the fact that the relationship between him and Nephis, while intimate and harmonious, did not run that deep. But now that there was a possibility that their peculiar relationship would end, he found himself treasuring it immensely. He didn't want to lose what they had now. He was already happy with what they had now. He was content, but he was also greedy, and wanted more. So much more. You're thinking greedy thoughts again. Nephis was playing with a stand of his hair, letting the black silk of it run between her fingers. She smiled faintly. Your eyes glisten a certain way when you do. Sunny turned his head and glanced at her silently. She looked into his eyes, no space between them. In the end, she turned away and sighed. I know every inch of you by heart. But I also don't know anything about you. It's so vexing. He remained silent for a bit, then hugged her from behind and drew her closer. What was he supposed to say? It won't be for much longer. Soon, you'll know everything about me soon, once again. That was what he wanted to tell her. But instead of saying these words aloud, Sunny smiled. I'm not too tall. So, there aren't that many inches of me, to begin with. Still, quite impressive. Nephis laughed quietly. Soon, the brilliant sun melted into the dark horizon. Their time of peace had run out.